On today's episode, I'll be breaking down the Rockets' unfortunate collapse against the Minnesota Timberwolves, where they were outscored 15-2 in the last 3 minutes of the game. We'll be going through some of the interviews, also breaking down the last two possessions. So make sure you stick around for the next episode of Rockets Field Podcast.
Got to get it in. Dustin Smith. Jabari for three and the win. Yeah! He got it!
We are here to Field Rockets News. This is Rockets Field Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, LaShar Binkley. I am a credential writer covering the Houston Rockets and the Rio Grande Valley Vipers. You can always find me on Twitter at Binkley Hoops, or you can find my written work over at Rockets on SI, part of Sports Illustrated. And of course, today, unfortunately, we are talking about the Rockets' collapse against the Minnesota Timberwolves. They failed to the Timberwolves 113-112 after leading by as many as 15 points in the fourth quarter. The Rockets failed to score more than 2 points in the last 3 minutes. They led by 12 points with a little over 3 minutes left, and like I said, only scored 2 points in that last 3 minutes, and Minnesota outscored them by 13, which led to the 1-point win. Of course, a game-winning basket by Anthony Edwards, the game-winning three that gave the Timberwolves the lead, but the Rockets still had a chance to win the game. They had 20 seconds left on the clock and decided not to call a timeout. We're going to break down the last two possessions. We're going to hear from Coach Ime Udoka why he did not call a timeout in that circumstance. And also, of course, talk about the dominant game from Alperensengun, who, despite the loss, had a season-high 38 points to go along with 12 rebounds, and he pretty much did everything he could. Unfortunately, even though he did miss 2 free throws late, but up until that point, he pretty much did everything he could to give the Rockets the lead and the win, and it looked like they were going to win the game. But as we know now, they didn't win the game. Like I said, kind of quickly going through the game, it was kind of a back and forth competition for a lot of the first half. Anthony Edwards started off extremely hot, especially in the first quarter. He had 13 points in the first quarter. He was 7 of 8 at one point, and then went on to miss his next 6 or 7 shots as the Rockets started to send more bodies towards him. Early in the game, Anthony Edwards was just able to get to the basket because they were picking off Amen Thompson, who was the primary person guarding Anthony Edwards most of the game, because Dillon Brooks missed yet another game. Tari Eason tried to go before the game. He did some pregame workouts, but he still wasn't able to go. He's missed several games in a row. That's a whole nother story that becomes a little bit more concerning, because this is the exact same thing that happened last year, where it was a lot of, hey, it's a game-by-game basis, and eventually then we got the news that he had the surgery and it was out for the rest of the year. Not to say that this is exactly what's going on this season, but like I said, it's kind of following that same pattern we saw last year when it comes to Tari Eason. But back to the game again, Amen was the primary person guarding Anthony Edwards, and they were doing a lot of screens trying to get Amen off Anthony Edwards, which worked earlier in the game, but then eventually the Rockets started to send more bodies towards him. And like I said, he missed those 7 shots in a row and really only finished with 5 points after that first quarter, but we know 3 of those points were the ones that gave them the lead for good at the end of the game. But again, it was a back and forth competition for most of the game. Alperensengun was absolutely destroying Rudy Gobert like he does pretty much every single time. One of the main reasons why is because they tend to not send a double team, because they figure, hey, Rudy Gobert is Defensive Player of the Year, multiple Defensive Player of the Year awards he has won, and we'll just let him go one-on-one, something most teams absolutely do not do these days when it comes to Sengun. And Sengun absolutely loves it. He actually talked a little bit about his mentality when teams like the Timberwolves like to try to play him single coverage.
I was just like going to kill it, and attack the body, be physical whole game, and this was.
And like I said, Alperensengun finished with a season-high 38 points. He was pretty much getting whatever he wanted up until that last possession. And before we get into that last possession, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that Ime Udoka said, because the very first question to Ime was, you had a timeout, why didn't you use it in that circumstance with 20 seconds left and you're now trailing? And this is what Ime said.
I think you had one left.
Yeah, I considered it and had the matchup that we liked, and they weren't necessarily set. So I want to give them a defensive sub, and albeit been having a favorable matchup there, obviously with 38 points.
And this kind of goes with what Ime's philosophy has been since he took over for the Rockets, is that late game situations, if they're trailing, they tend to not call a timeout because they don't want the defense to be able to set or bring in substitutions. But in this circumstance, what kind of bit the Rockets in the end was the fact that their personnel wasn't necessarily the right personnel to have for an end-of-game situation. And when we go through the play, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about, because when they did double team Şengün in the post, that's when the problem kind of came into focus, because they didn't have the right personnel. They didn't have Jalen Green out on the court, and the Timberwolves were able to they were able to kind of back off of Jason Tate, which caused problems for Şengün in the post, and that's why they were able to double team him. Like I said, when we go through the play, you'll be able to see it. And as great as Jason Tate was for pretty much the entire game, what he was doing out on the court, he's not necessarily somebody that the defense is going to worry about on the offensive end. And that's exactly what we saw in this last play. So let's go ahead and just break down this last play right quick. First, when we get the last play, you'll see Anthony Edwards is he's going to come around off his pick. And initially, again, I'm in the garden, but we're going to switch rock to Tate slide to stay with him. But the very last second, he's going to take him heads back into the paint. For some reason, I think Anthony Edwards was going to drive. And then Edwards just made a great shot. A great step back. Tate back for a second. That's why I got the shot. Let's break it down here. So, as you see, the play is going to develop. First, I'll let the play go ahead and play all the way through and see what happens. As you all know by now what happens. They're going to get the ball back. The guys kind of drops back down. He gets Fred VanVleet an open shot, and of course the shot just didn't go in. But let's kind of go back to before we even get to that. As they're bringing it down with 20 seconds left, as you see who they have on the court, they have VanVleet, Thompson, Tate is going to be off in the corner, and then Jabari Smith is on the other side. But as you see, what M.A. said at the beginning was, and what he said throughout the press conference, was that they weren't able to double team him when he was at the top of the paint. And that's what Şengün was operating for most of the game. He was operating at the top of the paint, and that made it a lot harder for them to double team him. And that's exactly what happened here. Randall was playing a one-on-one. Şengün was taking it to the basket. But unlike with Gobert, he wasn't able to drive by him because Randall's able to move his feet a little bit better. I mean, Randall's not some all-defensive player, but he is quicker than Gobert. So Şengün figured he can back Randall down, but what ended up happening was as soon as he turned his back, that's when they brought the double team, because the guy that was guarding Tate knew that more than likely they wasn't going to pass it to Tate for a game-winning shot, and that's why they were able to force that double team. And you'll see here, Şengün is driving. As soon as he turns his back, that's when they start to hedge their defender towards Şengün, because Tate is on that side, which that's a whole nother problem. That shouldn't have been the case. But Tate was on that side, so then he has to kick it out to Tate. And Tate, even though he can score in this situation, he's probably not going to take the shot, and that's exactly what happened. At this point right here, to me, this is when you call a timeout, because now your offense is scrambling. Whatever your initial play was is not going to happen. So now you're scrambling. Now time is running down. At this point, to me, this is where you kind of call a timeout. You reset, you get Jalen Green back in the game, because he has been your most clutch player all season long. And unfortunately, they didn't do that. And then that's when they're scrambling. They get the ball back to VanVleet. He tries to get the ball back down to Şengün, which is the right play. But again, they're not going to let Şengün beat him in this instance. So you see McDaniels is already hedging back down, because they're not going to let Şengün go one-on-one in this circumstance. So then Fred, the only shot left, because time is running down, the only shot left in this situation is Fred taking a 35-foot shot. I mean, he's hit him, occasionally, but he's not Steph Curry. He's not somebody that you're almost going to be confident that he's going to make this shot, especially since he has struggled in the fourth quarter. He started off the game pretty well from three-point range. Him and Jalen Green, for the first 3.5 quarters, one of the only players that even made three-pointers until Jabari Smith finally made a couple in the fourth quarter. But he has started to struggle the last quarter and a half. And then, of course, as you know, the shot goes up, bounces off the rim, and time runs out, and the Rockets lose the game. So, unfortunately, that's kind of how that last possession went. And like I said, I understand the premise of what Silas. I said Silas. I understand the premise that Udoka is saying in this situation where they don't want the team to set up the defense to set up, and they want to kind of catch them off guard. But with 20 seconds left, and when you see Sengun has to pass it out of that post that first time, that's when you call timeout. You draw up a play, you get Jalen in the game so that they can't double team Sengun. Because if they double team Sengun and leave Jalen Green open, unlike with Tate, Jalen Green's going to take that open three. And of course, you take your chances a lot more with Jalen Green taking that three than Jayshawn Tate. But unfortunately, they didn't do that. And they end up losing the game. Like I said, they got outscored 15-2 in the last 3 minutes of the game. The only 2 points they had were Sengun splitting 2 free throws towards the end of the game, which was another issue. He went 1 or 2 on his last two times from the free throw line, and that kind of let Timberwolves back in the game. The Rockets had a turnover in that period. They had several missed shots in the last 3 minutes of the game, and like I said, the Timberwolves just started to go downhill, started to get confidence, and the Rockets couldn't stop them. And as much as we talk about the offense, the defense was just as bad in the last 3 minutes. I mean, the Rockets are the second best defensive team in the league. They should be able to keep Minnesota from scoring 15 points in the last 3 minutes of the game. That was another problem with that at the end of that game. And like I said, when you're looking at the stats, the Rockets again struggle from 3-point range as they had all season long, and kind of a little bit off that topic, which has kind of been a problem all season, is they brought in Reed Sheppard to kind of be that guy from 3-point range. And he struggled so much in the first 4 minutes that he was in. He didn't even play the rest of the game. Cam Whitmore coming off his season high, 27 points a game before. He struggled. He went 1 for 5, 0 for 3 from 3-point range. He didn't play again in the second half after their initial first 12 minutes he played. Like I said, the Rockets went 10 for 30 from 3-point range, which is just it's pretty bad. I mean, it's kind of been a situation all year. The Rockets have been one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the league. They've actually regressed from last season, where they actually started to improve a little bit, finished 23rd in the league in 3-point shooting. Now they're back towards the bottom again in 3-point shooting. The Rockets only had 3 players total make 3-pointers last night, and that was Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, and Jabari Smith. Outside of those 3 players, the rest of the team went 0 for 6 from 3-point range. And I mean, even Jabari's 2 made threes, he was 2 for 8 from 3-point range. So that is something, whether the Rockets make a major trade, whether they don't make a major trade and make a smaller trade, they got to bring in somebody that can make a shot, because I don't care how great your defense is. At the end of the day, this is a league about makes and misses. And if you're constantly shooting 10 for 30 from 3-point range, eventually it's going to catch up to you, especially in a tight Western Conference. Now, 1 loss and the Rockets fell back down to the 3rd seed. Now they're half game behind Memphis Grizzlies in the standings. So again, the Rockets shooting came back to bite them again last night, because they just could not make a shot when they needed one in those final 3 minutes of the game. And kind of also following up on Reed Sheppard, I just feel like you're at the point now that you're not probably going to send Cam back down to G League. It makes absolutely no sense. He's not really benefiting. He's much better than all the players in the G League. We already know this. But Reed Sheppard is really mental. And I think Ryan Hollins said the game before, it's kind of in his head right now. When you start to lose confidence, especially in the NBA, it goes downhill fast. And I think for him to get that confidence back, I think it makes sense to send him down to G League. And I actually brought this up to MA before, and the answer was kind of, well, he kind of feels a position of need, and we don't really have anybody else that can play his position, unlike with Cam. But if you're looking at the team, that doesn't really hold up, because Aaron Holiday, to me, is a better player than Reed Sheppard, and he can play those minutes that you occasionally give the backup point guard, which honestly is not a lot of minutes. I mean, Fred VanVleet is still playing a ton of minutes, a lot more than he should be. He played 39 minutes last night, so there's not really a lot of minutes behind Fred anyway, and those minutes can be filled by Aaron Holiday too, who at this point in his career is just a better player than Reed Sheppard. So Reed Sheppard will get a lot more confidence. He's able to get down in the G League, get up as many shots as he wants with the Vipers, but I mean, we'll see if that happens. It hasn't happened yet for whatever reason. I've tried to ask and find out, but I just haven't really got a straight answer when it comes to that. But at the end of the day, it's 1 loss. You had a chance for your fifth straight win. You were in a great position, and it just collapsed late in the fourth quarter. And that kind of happens sometimes in the NBA. The key for the Rockets is not to let this linger into their next game. The next game is against Miami Heat, who will be without Jimmy Butler. So you have to take advantage of that game. You have to win that game. I know you have a tough schedule coming up in these next few games as far as your schedule for the end of this year going into the start of the next calendar year. But you're at home. You're trying to be one of the elite teams in the NBA. You need to take advantage of games like against Miami. Dallas may be without Luka because he got hurt on Christmas Day. Then you play Boston, of course, who's one of the best teams in the league. And then you play Los Angeles, and Anthony Davis went out also on Christmas. So who knows whether he's going to be playing or not. So even though you got some tough teams coming up, you're trying to be one of the elite teams in the league. You need to be able to win these games at home during your homestand. And like I said, unfortunately, you let this game slip away. And in a tough Western Conference where you lose 2 or 3 games in a row, you can go from the second seed all the way down to the 8th seed really fast. You can't continue to let these type of games get away. So now you got to just regroup, go back on Monday and be able to get that victory against a Jimmy Butler-less Miami Heat team. And just real quickly before I wrap it up, I want to talk a little bit about the rumors that's been going around. Because, of course, when you start winning, you start to become a part of the blockbuster trades that are floating around this time of year. And, of course, the latest one was Jimmy Butler again. We heard a report from ESPN stating that Jimmy Butler is not asking for a trade, but he prefers to be traded before the trade deadline because he didn't get his contract extension. And I'll say the same thing I've been saying on Twitter X for the last 2 months. To me, it doesn't make any sense going for a Jimmy Butler who's 36-year-old, who has a player option, who's going to be wanting to make anywhere between 40 to 50 million on his next contract. You're going to give 40, 50 million dollars to a 36-year-old who's, I don't know if you can say injury prone, but let's just say he doesn't play a lot of regular season games these days. And you're going to, and people were saying, well, you can just give up Fred VanVleet and one other guy. Pat Riley is not going to give you Jimmy Butler for just Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks' contract. And if you're even looking at Dillon Brooks, has played more games this year than Fred VanVleet, than Jimmy Butler. And Dillon Brooks is actually one of the most consistent Rockets on the team this year. And if you're looking at defense, offense, is there a better player on this team when it comes to consistently being good on both ends than Dillon Brooks? So Pat Riley's going to want Ahmed Thompson, or he's going to want Jabari Smith, or he's going to want Jalen Green, or he's going to want some combination of those guys. And then you're going to have to give up Dillon Brooks because you have to make the contracts match, because Jalen Green's new contract doesn't kick into next season. So he's still not making enough to where you can just trade a Jalen Green and some other guy to make the contract work. No, you have to give up Dillon Brooks because he's making $20 million a year. So to me, it doesn't make any sense to do that, to give it for a 36-year-old Jimmy Butler. Not to say Jimmy Butler's not a good player, but he's past his prime at this point. Let's just be honest. Now, if you're talking about somebody like a Devin Booker or a De'Aaron Fox, then that's a whole different situation, because those guys are both still in their prime years. But for Jimmy Butler, it doesn't make any sense to me to make that trade. And I don't think that Rafael Stone, even though he said, yeah, he's not going to trade in the young core, I think he would be a lot more willing to do it if you're talking about a star player that's still in their prime and not a Jimmy Butler. So I don't see the Rockets trading for Jimmy Butler. I could be shocked. I don't have any inside information, but I would be shocked if they traded for Jimmy Butler. So that's kind of how I feel about the whole Jimmy Butler situation. But I'm sure it's going to be a lot more rumors flying around before we get to the trade deadline. I just want to thank everybody for continuing to support the channel. If you're new to the channel and you're not subscribed, we definitely welcome in. And if you can subscribe, that would be great. Give us a like. That always helps with the algorithm. As you go through the channel, you'll see we just don't do podcasts. We do highlights. I go out to a lot of the games and the practices. So that's why you see a lot of the pre and post game interviews. Of course, I'll continue to do that throughout the year. So we're kind of cover all the areas when it comes to the Rockets, even holiday events or events that they do throughout the community. We pretty much bring it all to you here. So definitely we appreciate you supporting the channel. Like I said, if you haven't liked this video, and we will continue to bring you great coverage all season long. And as usual, we appreciate you coming out and checking out the channel. Make sure you check out the next episode of the Rocket Fuel Podcast.